pull a few more chairs down, or?
What?
Using so you're laughing? I'll go back, it's fine.
I probably shouldn't stand right there. Okay.
All right.
Again, you're Moshe Berman?
Yes. Okay, welcome to the FrumDevs Meetup. My name is Moshe. I'm an iOS engineer. I think I know most of you offline. For everyone else, hi. I've worked on a number of Jewish apps over the years, including apps for Yeshiva World News, the OU, I've worked with Dafka, and many others. So the Jewish app space is a space that I'm really passionate about, so I'm really excited to be here to talk to you tonight about Code Halacha, writing great apps to serve the Jewish nation. So let's get started. First, we're going to talk about a definition for Code Halacha, because there are many great Jewish apps out there, and there are a lot of them that you might not expect to fall under this banner of halacha. And just for clarity's sake, and to cover those cases, we're going to give a definition. Next, we're going to talk about achrayus. With great power comes great responsibility, because it's true. As from developers, we have a great power to build apps and services for our family and our communities, and that power comes with responsibility.
Well, do you mind if I turn out the lights?
Go for it. So with that power comes a responsibility. So we're going to talk about some of the challenges, responsibilities posed by that power, and how we can address it. And finally, Kol Yisrael Arivim Zeh Lezeh, no Jew left behind. This is probably my favorite part of the talk. We're going to talk about things like accessibility, user experience, localization, and how you can take your good Jewish apps and make them into great Jewish apps. So what is Code Halacha? So I was thinking about it, and I kind of came up with a definition. Code Halacha is code that helps Jews to observe the Torah and the mitzvahs according to the mesorah, their minhagim, and das Torah. There are a couple of parts to point out here. We have mesorah, which is general halacha, and then you have das Torah and minhagim, which very often come across in the same way. And when you're writing halacha code, you want it to be flexible, not just according to your own minhagim, but according to the minhagim of all your users. So we're going to talk a little bit about that later on.
I gather code, kukuf vav dalet, is actually used in Hebrew to mean code,
Yes.
C-O-D-E?
Yeah. When I was putting together the talk, I was debating between using English, spelling things out in English and spelling them out in Hebrew, and I tried it in both, and this just looked a lot better. So, yeah. Okay, so as part of the preparation, I went to the App Store, and I downloaded a ton of Jewish apps. I categorized them into various different categories here. And then I went ahead and I put together a little word cloud of the different various Jewish app genres. So some of the more obvious genres for halachic code are things like a brachos database, zmanim calculators, and taras hamishpacha apps. But some of the less obvious ones are Jewish dating apps, kosher food apps, and digital sefarim libraries. So the Jewish dating app is halachic because your users are assuming that everyone who's using the app is actually Jewish, and in the case of Frum, people actually from. So you're essentially giving a cheskes kashrus on the yichus of all the users on your app if you don't do it the right way. Similarly, kosher food finders, we're going to talk a little bit more about this. When you have a restaurant in your app, you're giving hashgacha either on the hashgacha for the restaurant or on the restaurant itself, depending how you do it. And finally, digital sefarim libraries. This one's actually pretty interesting. Because this goes back to the point of mesorah. When you're publishing digital content, digital Torah content, you have to verify that you're doing it right, especially since it's so easy to just change text on the web, and considering how careful we are with the Sefer Torah, the contrast that with the ability to change text on the web is pretty fascinating. Okay, so I just want to give a little example here about the digital sefarim libraries. And we have three apps here. We'll get to the icons in just a second. We have Uvlechtecha Maderach, Pocket Torah, and Kisvei Kodesh. Now, only one of these apps is actually a Frum halachic app. The other two are completely not. And so here are the app icons. You may recognize the Frum one if you're an iPhone user. And here are the app icons with the names. So So I want to focus on this one for a second. This looks like a Tanakh app. It says Tanakh at the top, and it's got Hebrew on the bottom. It looks like a nice design app. But when you take a little closer look, you kind of see that it's actually a missionary Tanakh. And so I was looking at the App Store today, and I found this. And so I think this really stresses the importance of when you're putting together a digital, a textual halachic app, you really have to be careful to make sure that you're providing the accurate content. And this is something that I wonder about a lot of the sitter apps out there, who verifies them and whose nusach is that. I mean, the sitter is interesting, especially because you have all these different nuschos, and some of it's city-based, some of it's based on other things. So it's a really interesting area. So with that, let's talk about some of the responsibilities. So what are some of these responsibilities? Well, we have to ask ourselves some questions. Does my content accurately represent halacha? So we just talked about that a little bit. We're going to talk a little more about that. Does my code accurately represent halacha? So we're going to talk about some strategies to make sure that both of these things are done correctly. And finally, I'm being sensitive to my users' minhagim. This is something we talked about before, and I want to stress it again. So how are we going to actually do that? Make sure that we're living up to these responsibilities. So the first one is ask your LOR, classic answer. Talk to your Rav or your domain expert. I have two examples of this that we're going to go through. And the next one is you can actually have your Rav or your expert help write unit tests, which is not something that most people think of, but there's some good context for that as well. And finally, listen to your user feedback, and one way to do this is to make your code flexible. So listen to user feedback and make your code flexible. So, talking about working with a Rav, I have an anecdote here. We have the Kosher GPS app. That banner wasn't supposed to be that big yet, but basically the Kosher GPS app, you'll notice it has a nice icon. It's got a nice iOS UI. It looks nice. It's built natively. I worked on this, disclaimer. Now, the thing is that there's this big banner at the top that says, remember to call ahead and verify the hashgacha, but you don't actually see the hashgacha anymore. And this was a decision that was made based on a conversation with a Rav. It was not something that I personally agreed with, but the conversation was, I asked the people who maintain this database, I said, how come you don't show user hashgachas? And I think we even got maybe some feedback in the group once the app update came out. And they said, well, we asked the Rav, and the thing about the kosher restaurant industry is that hashgachas can change really quickly. Somebody can open the app, see that something's under the OU, the Chav K, whatever, but go to the restaurant, not bother to check, and someone could go to the restaurant and between the time they left their house and the time they get there, the hashgacha could change, and so they didn't want to have an achrayus on them. So my take is that now you're not showing the hashgacha, you're actually giving a hashgacha essentially, because now you're saying, we know the hashgacha, we know it's good, but we're not telling you what it is. And so it didn't make so much sense to me, but they asked the Rav, and that was what they got. So if it's Das Torah and that's the answer you get, then you can be comfortable that your code is doing the right thing. Okay, next, Ultimate Zmanim. This is an app of mine. And here's another example of working with an expert. Ultimate Zmanim is based on Kosher Cocoa, which is an Objective-C framework that I ported from Java. The Java version is called Kosher Java. It was written by Elio Hirschfeld. He lives in Lakewood. He's been doing the Zmanim code for a very, very, very long time. I recently had the opportunity to swing by his office. I sat down with him. We schmoozed about this for a bit. He told me that he was interested in writing Zmanim code on Apple IIs when he was in high school, and he's got several decades more life and work experience than I do. So this is something that the idea of Zmanim was something that he was very passionate about, and as he got older, he eventually built out an entire framework that now powers probably all the Jewish mobile apps that use Zmanim, with few exceptions. So in my case, he was my expert that I relied on, and he's gone through Svarim and all the. It's like the code comments literally look like a Mara Mukomos, because he says Rav Tukachinsky says this and Heepkel says that, and it's like really, really mind blowing. So not just working with Rav, sometimes you can work with a domain expert as well. Now, if you are working with your Rav or your expert, they can help you with unit tests. So I was thinking about this, and the reason why the way I came about this was actually halachic, right? So I was talking to Rav about some of the apps that are out there for this, and he said to me, that it was my cousin's Rav. He said to my cousin, there aren't any really good apps that are acceptable to most Ashkenazi minhagim. So I started working on this problem, and I started thinking about it. And it turns out, if you look at certain svarim, they actually give you not just halachos, but examples of how to calculate certain best kavuas and things like that. So, for example, if you look in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, there's like 2 seifim that have examples of like the specific days, and it's essentially a unit test. And so what you can do is you can read the sefer, write it out in Python, Swift, Java, whatever your native language is, and you've effectively given your computer a unit test from a sefer, or you can, if your domain doesn't have it, you can talk to a Rav and get that from them as well. So that's one example. The other example here is the Tur Shulchan Aruch has a 19-year calendar on the back, and you can also use that if you're doing something with Zmanim to check your work, so to speak.
Just a question, what years are those?
I don't even know. I think the years are on the top.
Is it just every 19 years, just a cycle?
Oh, I guess
that's
that's
right.
right.
That's right.
Yeah,
Well,
so-
but the dates aren't going to repeat themselves.
But it's the kinds of
When
years.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
understand, but with day in the week and so forth.
Yeah.
It's not quite.
So-
up to
Where are we looking
5,000. Hey, tough,
Where are you
okay,
looking?
look, the right side. The right table.
Goes past that.
Above Chavdalad,
at? Go flip that one there, that's the last one.
Yeah, that's what
6,020.
This isn't.
Where
This is. I don't think this is actually the tourist chart. I think this is a chart based on it. But the point is that so I actually used this kind of approach when I was dealing with calculating partios. So that's a little easier because essentially you have the 19 years follow the different laning styles for the year. So that's the context that I ran into it. But if you're doing something else, that may also be relevant. Okay, so moving on, listening to your users. So I have a separate email account just for my app email feedback and just for my app work, and I have a Gmail tag here for all my apps, from all my app support emails. And you can see here that I'm just getting like, a couple emails a week, users with questions and feedback and things like that. It's pretty active. Sometimes it fluctuates, but it's always exciting to get another email where it's a simple fix. You get a user happy, you make a user happy that you gave them 5 minutes. It's good for business and it's good for the product. So in one particular case here, I got an email from somebody who says, "Thank you for your advanced app. My Rav is a posik, and he uses this sheet different saves." Now he says he didn't find it in the app. Now I took a look at the app, and he's right. It didn't exist. I ported kosher Java, so that means all the APIs that I had. I added some other features around metadata and partios and things like that. But at the end of the day, the user has a minimum that he holds by, and I didn't support it. So I took a look at the code, and I said, hey, this is how I'm calculating, and I have a saves method here, and it just gets a sunset offset. You pass in a zenith constant. They're defined as offsets of a 90-degree zenith. And so I just added another method. And now I can support this user really easy. So that's the idea of being flexible. If you architect your code right, I mean, this is basic architecture, but if you architect your code right, you can be flexible for your users. Okay, so speaking of our users, Kol Yisrael Arei Zelazeh, no Jew left behind. So let's talk about how we can do some things to better serve our users and make those good Jewish apps into great Jewish apps. So some questions for ourselves. Do I offer a great user experience? Do I think about other kinds of users? Impaired users, users who speak other languages? And am I taking advantage of the latest technologies? This kind of ties into user experience, but it's something that I'm passionate about, so I have a couple of examples specific to that. So first of all, offer a great UX, build native. There are many platforms out there that let you write apps in one language, like HTML and CSS, and then transpile it to other languages. Doing that is like this: a paper safer Torah. It looks the same. Most users might not get it, but anyone who understands will know that it's not the same thing. So don't do that. Just one example of this is this app here. You may or may not be able to tell. I blurred out the name. It's a kosher organizations app. And it was done by a Jewish web development agency. And it looks pretty decent, except when you turn it offline. So you notice a couple things. First of all, the back button, you can't even see it in this lighting. It's black, and the arrow next to it is not, so it's hard to read. Next, there's no content when you're offline. And finally, the spinner, once it shows up, it doesn't go away, and then you can't switch tabs, you can't do anything in the app. So these are kinds of things that you can do when you're building native, but they're easier to do when you're building in a transpiled framework. And speaking of not such great user experiences, let's look at there's an Omer app that I was looking at before. And as we can see here, we have a countdown to the number of days left because it's out of season. So it seems like it's a pretty good UX because it's accounting for most of the year where it's not actually being done. It has a nice design. And then we hit the Explore button. And it basically takes you into the app. So it's like, okay, you put all this effort to making a nice app, and even handling this use case, and then you let users just get right around it. So don't do that. Pay attention to the details, build nice native UX, and pay attention to your edge cases as well.
You'd admit you're probably the only person that opened this app now. I mean, there's probably nobody else in the universe who did this.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
don't notice that.
you still have many apps that I had open
Because
there.
maybe people are teaching or something. This though.
Yeah. So now I want to talk about some apps that I think did a pretty good job. So here's one app. The OU's actual flagship app. They have a couple of apps. They have some Shiurim apps. They have a Pesach app. The OU Kosher app, it looks pretty nice, and it was done natively. I pulled apart the app bundle. They're using nibs. Which means that they're using native code. And I just took one screenshot here. If we're doing video demos, you'd see it a little better. But the visual design is on point. The content is on point. The offline experience isn't the greatest, but they've done a much better job than a lot of other Jewish apps that I've seen. Another app that I looked at is Gematria. This is a Gematria calculator by Dafka Corporation. As a disclaimer, I worked on some of the UI for them, and I just rebuilt this for 64-bit and iOS 11 and all that for them. But basically what you have up there is just code lahalacha according to the mesorah calculation, because it's the only one that had anything that looked reasonably decent. But again, it's a native app, and the fact that I was able to take a 6-year-old code base and bring it into the modern age in under 3 hours with like very little actual modification speaks to just the quality and that kind of thing.
What language was that written?
It's written in Objective-C. One other cool thing that you can't see here, but I want to call out, is they did a really nice job of pre-computing all the gematrias to make it that when you type in something, you're just calculating what you put in the box, so then they can key into whatever else, all the results. So it's really snappy and that kind of thing. So do things like that. The next topic that I want to talk about is how our users are very diverse and they speak many languages. And so it's important to localize your apps when you're making halachic or Jewish apps. So remember that user who emailed before who said that his Rav has a different shita, about 5 to 6.5 degrees? So I continued that dialogue with him. And I asked him who his Rav was because I was curious, and he gave me a little more information than I had asked for. So he tells me the name of his Rav, and then he says that he's the Dayan of the Moscow based, right? So that means that even if he doesn't live in Moscow, there's a good chance he speaks Russian. So I've gotten emails in Ultimate Zmanim and Ultimate Omer from places like Mexico, Germany, and I actually took advantage of that for Ultimate Omer, where the Chabad rabbi in Mexico City emailed me, and I had asked him if he could help me out translating the app. And as you can see, Ultimate Omer is now available in Spanish as well as English, French, and Hebrew. So I think that this is a really, really overlooked aspect of Jewish app development, is that Jewish apps are either made in America or Israel, and so they're either exclusively in Hebrew or exclusively in English. Like apps made in Israel are not going to have very good English user interfaces, generally speaking, and the same goes for apps made here in America. You're going to have some Hebrew interface because we all went to yeshiva and we all can type and speak it, but you're not going to have anything for Russian-speaking Jews. You're not going to have anything for Spanish-speaking Jews or French-speaking Jews. And there's a massive French-Jewish community as well, and they have a lot of developers that I know personally. And so they will do their apps in French, but as a general rule, this is not like a common practice, and I really think that it's really, really a lost opportunity because we have all this great content and we really can make it, you know, accessible to our brothers and sisters who are native to other languages. So this is something that I would encourage people to look into, even though it's super expensive, because you can find volunteers, friends, whatever, to help out with that kind of thing. Finally, let's talk about adopting new features. This is something else that I'm really, that I get really excited about. And it's things like Apple's handoff or Apple Watch, things like that that like really are places that we can put our content and, you know, take advantage of the ecosystems. So here's a Dafyomi app that I am currently working on. It's going through iterative releases on the App Store, and the content is coming from a Dafyomi share in Liquid. And what we see here is you have at the top the latest upload. So this is a recent screenshot. It's the middle of Baba Basra towards the end. You have a surprise new feature which shows these raid bites, which are several minute long snippets of interesting content from the shiurim. And then you have the popular stuff, which is powered by a backend powered by Google Analytics. So Google Analytics pulls in the tracks which shiurim people tap on, and then our API will tally those numbers up and put the most exciting things in there. So now one of the really exciting features here for me is, let's say someone emails you a link to shiur. So we have this feature where you can share a shiur from the app, and you get like a dafyomi.net link, and it shows you this, and then if you're on mobile, it'll hide the platform that you're not using, so you can open the appropriate app, gives you the banner at the top. But one thing that Apple has, which is really cool, is they have this feature called handoff, where if I'm near my Mac and I have my phone and I have the app installed, I can open up the shiur right in the app. And you see that banner on the bottom, shows up, I can tap on it, and then I'll open up the appropriate shiur. It's things like that really make an app stand out, and it's things like that that just are totally overlooked for some reason within apps that we build for ourselves. One other awesome feature that I want to point out here is Force Touch. It's an Apple thing, but the Surprise Me feature and the latest off, which you have on the Explorer screen in the Dafyomi app, you get them right by force touching on the icon. And you can see when you have the 5 minutes from the dial, if I were to update it, then it would update it as well over there. And then next time I force touch, I would remember that was the user preference and access it right there. And the same thing for the latest stuff. When the data gets updated in the background, or when the user opens the app and refreshes, same thing over there. And it's just like these like small things that we can really do. I went through that whole screen of apps. I must have gone through 80% of it because I was just like clicking around, force touching, and it gets tiresome after a while. There were 4 apps that adopted it, and at least 2 of them were mine. And it's just like, it's a huge opportunity, and it's such a chaval, because like, it's not a hard technology to adopt. You add some keys to an XML file, or you can write a few lines of code and you're done. So those are the things that I really enjoy about apps. And I think that these are really, really important things to include in your Jewish apps. So wrapping up, we talked about paying attention to halacha and your users, some techniques, having your Rav help you write those unit tests, and finally a little bit about offering great UX. And if there's one takeaway, it's this: Jewish apps can work well and be delightful to use. And again, like, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here, but this is just, it's something that I feel really strongly about, and I'm excited to see, what comes out of this. So, thank you. Okay, so a couple things about that.
Repeat the question.
So the question was, would I consider putting ads in my apps, and because people just download Jewish apps because they're there and they need them, not because. So there's no incentive. In other words, there's no incentive for publishers to create good apps. There's no incentive for users to care about the apps. And I think that's somewhat of a chicken and egg problem, but I think I've broken the cycle to a tiny degree. In terms of the Sphere space, right? I was the first Sphere app in 2012 to change in Shkia, for example, because I had the Kosher Cocoa framework. Rusty Brick had their own Zlano code at that point, but they weren't using it for this. And since then, all the Sphere apps suddenly care about, Shkia. In terms of the ads part, two things. One is with Kosher GPS, when I worked on it with them, I tried to limit where, like I kind of pushed back a little bit. I said, okay, we should put ads in this screen, not on this one. Since they took over the project, it's kind of showed up in a few more places. What I've done personally in Ultimate Zmanim is I have double model. I used to have ads, and it would trickle in a couple of bucks a week. And then I added premium features. So things like printing, local notification alarms based on Zmanim, which are insanely difficult to do on iOS because of local notification limits and stuff. But I started adding these premium features, and I would sell them for a one-time price of $2-3, and it's turned into a steady trickle of like $100 a month or more or less. Now, the next thing that I want to try with that is maybe subscription pricing, because believe it or not, I think that there are people who may go for it, and we'll see, then it turns into a recurring trickle, and then that's a lot nicer. Now, as far as the ads part specifically goes in Zmanim, what I've done is made a specific kind of ad style that looks decent and normal in the app for myself. So when a user opens the app and they're a free user, there's like a one line of text that's like integrated into like the table view, and it says like what you see, click here, or want to print these Zmanim, tap here, or want to it just rotates things like that. But it's not flashy and it's not bothersome. It's like the text only approach, and I think that if it's done tastefully, users don't mind, and there could be a benefit to it. So that's my take on it.
Pretty cool.
Are you porting the Gemara app over to Android?
So it's actually available on Android. Shmuel has a friend who I know who's working on it.
I do.
Yes, sir.
Oh,
Yes,
still Bell?
Yeah.
I was still doing that. Cool.
Yeah, he's still doing that. So.
Where's the text for the Gemara come from?
So the images, I think it's i.yomi.net.
Which is public,
It's one of these public websites. Again, this does go back to the same question, and I wonder if apps should have hashgachas or skamas or anything, but because if you think about it, right, it's content, it's media, so.
Well, I get that question with I have this Zmanim app on Android, and I got the same question that people ask of how do you determine this, or what do you know? And also in Israel or in many different cities, they have different minhagim for when candlelighting is on Friday, right?
Yeah.
And I have the ability in the app to change. You can change it from 18 minutes to whatever you want, but default is 18 because I don't know all the minhagim.
So what's
for
the
every
answer to
city.
the question? What do you base anything off of?
So
what you were brought up with?
Different cities have minhagim based on their city, and there's Yerushalayim is 40 minutes, right?
Yep.
Yeah, 40, and that's the minhag of the city historically, right? A lot of cities, especially throughout Europe, a lot of cities have minhagim, that were started hundreds of years ago, and that's just what people do. So Chabad actually has a database of all of these minhagim,
Really?
but it's proprietary to them. So what I do is I just have the option for the person to change it, and you do the best you can do. But often people email me and say the Shul newsletter says this and your app says this, you're wrong, and I said, well, go and change the minutes to whatever it is.
Yeah.
But I don't know, I have a disclaimer on the store listing that says check with your Rav or whatever, make sure the Zmanim are correct for your area. But at the end of the day, no one reads that.
No one reads anything.
And I don't know, I guess at some point you just do the best you can do,
and these are not even the needed apps are serious. That's real halacha. I mean, if you're going to put something in there people are going to use blindly, it's a pretty big undertaking. So interesting.
Yeah.
Did you have B&H as a Jewish app?
No. So that's the thing. There are plenty of Jewish apps by Jews, maybe for Jews, but B&H. So
these are public service apps, right? Well, Rustenberg charges for a sitter app, which I think is worth all of them, $5 on Hanukkah.
Well, there's two versions. They have a $19.99 version and a $4.99 version. There's the tefillah pack and the full sitter.
Oh yeah, that's the English translation or something, right? So
Right, I don't have the English translation.
No, but even without it, they have value add inside.
Mhm.
Let's see here. So just to talk about the what do you call it? So we're talking about Shabbos times over here.
Yeah.
So two things. I found that one of the best ways to deal with that kind of thing is just to show users tell users what they're looking at. So if a user sees that Zman is 18 minutes, then that adds less question because they know, oh, it's 18 minutes, but I hold 40, I can do the math. Or they can go ahead and change it if they're a premium user, same thing. I had a conversation though yesterday. Somebody's been trying to reach me for months. He was emailing me. He has a minhag. He davens nates, and he wanted to daven nates according to the elevation. And there's something called the high tables. Shmuel, you're probably familiar with this.
The high tables, but elevation.
Just the idea of the high table. Somebody just all put together all these tables based on elevation and all that kind of stuff. And this guy lives in Brooklyn. He calls me up and he wants to know. The app says Brooklyn. What do you mean by Brooklyn? Which part of Brooklyn? I said, well, actually, use your GPS coordinates, and it says Brooklyn because I'm not going to tell you 702 Ocean Parkway. If you live at 700, you're going to say, oh, this is broken because geocoding's like that. So I just say, okay, Brooklyn, but I know exactly where you are to like the nearest 10, 100, 1,000 meters, whatever it is, and it's as accurate as your high tables or your elevation or whatever. I spent 40 minutes on the phone explaining the whole concept to him yesterday. So it happens,
But you're still not calculating for his elevation, right?
GPS doesn't do elevation. They're very inaccurate with elevation. They're
Interesting.
But based on
Why?
the location, you can use WGS 84 and get elevation for any coordinate.
I guess, but if they're on the
GPS
15th floor of a building,
Okay.
Well, I had a similar thing.
No, but I don't think.
GPS
Different
doesn't do
time-
elevation.
different time in the same building.
I think it does.
I think
I
it
think
does
it
the
does
elevation.
elevation.
it's very, very inaccurate. Extremely
Especially
inaccurate.
cell phone
Way
ones.
more than lat long.
Really?
Way more,
Yeah.
like 5 times more inaccurate.
Oh.
And
Especially
lat
smartphone.
long is pretty accurate.
Especially a smartphone.
Well, how long is like 9 meters officially, no?
Yep.
How do you handle edge cases? For example, I was in Hawaii once, and it's
Oh,
and it's
what day of the week?
during Omer, actually. Just recently, there was an article. Somebody's flying from South Korea Friday morning, and then it's JFK Friday morning. Do you cross Shabbos or not? When do you cross the dayline? So, do you handle kind of cases, or do you just say there are edge cases that I'm never going to be able to handle? And
So no and no. I don't handle them currently, and I don't say that they're edge cases and I'm not going to handle them. I've been talking to Elio about this. This is a problem that he's interested in. That's something that I'm interested in. I think that the technical problem we're trying to solve now is the best way to either get GPS inside of a bulkhead or compensate for the lack of it. Because if you're inside of an airplane, you're basically inside of what do you call
Faraday
it?
cage.
A Faraday cage, exactly.
GPS sometimes works near your window.
Sometimes near a window, and if you get a fix on the ground, then it's easier and stays longer.
There are limitations to that though, like commercial GPS that we have in phones. Very
Supposed to
often,
stay holding your-
yeah, very often they won't go beyond a certain elevation. They won't work above a certain elevation.
It's like 670,000.
So I'm
No,
actually
it's
much
with
lower.
speed. The certain
Much
elevation,
lower.
I think it's like 10,000 feet, but if you're going over like 800 miles an hour,
They do
the
that
chip will turn off.
intentionally.
So
just
we
to
launched the
have
Nexus phone on a rocket.
is that an Android thing or a Google thing?
I think it's,
GPS
it's a government
it's-
regulation.
So you don't put it on a cruise missile.
Yeah.
Right.
No.
Speaking of North
They
Korea,
gave it to us, right? The government gave us that.
The government gives us satellites, but we have to, in the receivers, we have to put that limitation in the chips that we make.
Manufacturer put it in the chip.
I'm
Manufacturer,
curious
yeah.
to know, so I actually have an open TSI with an Apple engineer. I'm having a whole dialogue about this. So I have to run some tests on the ground and write some code to isolate what's going on, and then we're gonna see. It could just be that, but it's weird because people can turn on the GPS on the ground and it seems to keep a fix until you close the app. So I'm really trying to figure out what's going on with that.
you have people who are testing this for you, like while they're in planes.
It's hard to find people, but I've got a couple of people, and
I've turned my phone on like while I'm flying, and being that I do Zwana and all that, like, and I don't get a GPS up there.
so I've tried that too. But if you turn it on the ground and then you keep it
So
open,
it keeps the
it
fix.
keeps the fix.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So
I
there,
fly in 3 weeks.
there are a couple of other options around that, like calculus and flight paths, or web APIs. Like there are different ways to do it. Again, like I said, this is an ongoing conversation.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, using like those flight tracker websites, you can get a flight number.
Isn't there a flight tracker's mounting thing?
My one does estimate.
Just
What's
launched
flight
the new
tracker
one.
wise on?
Well, there are flight tracker websites that will track one. MySmonitor just added this new thing where
It's not new. They
Right.
just updated their engine,
right.
but
Which
they're
does
getting a
what?
lot high.
We should get MySmonitor in here so we can.
Well, every plane
What's the way to
has
do? What's my-
flight tracking on the plane itself anyway, right?
Yeah.
So couldn't you at least piggyback to tell the person if it's really like that important and they can look
can't
at the
calculate
screen
what
what's
you're
that?
at flights.
Oh yeah, they can do that. Right. But yeah, we should.
It's harder to get it into your app, I guess.
If you
but-
run
All that data
Unity
is public though. Like there are these flight tracker
Yeah.
websites. So like if you put in a flight number, it'll show you where that plane is.
But
I would say
you have
harder,
no
it's
access
more
to data
effort
when you're on the
and
plane.
overhead initially,
Well, I
so
guess
I just
No,
think
it's
the
fine.
benefits are.
You're just kind of-
Wi-Fi now.
because
Not over the. that's
Really?
not-
They have no-
only,
no
only,
experience.
only
They were
over
school,
ground, not in the over.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
If you write in
Right.
C,
Based
you
on
might be
ground
able to get
towers.
some things to port, but your
You
UI
can
is
get
gonna
historic
have,
flights and where they were at a certain time.
Right, yeah,
Just
I don't
based
know.
on your takeoff time.
There's a lot of different ways to dice it. I got a similar feedback on my Zmanim app where someone said to me that like I think it was either the My Zmanim website or their calendar. It was like a minute off, from like what my app showed. And I take those very seriously because it could be that there's an issue, and so I looked into it, and it turns out that My Zmanim, the website, was rounding a certain way. I was rounding to be more machmir. They were rounding a different way, but also like the rounding cutoff was at a certain amount of seconds, whatever it was. But because his phone location was more precise than the website,
That's what I thought.
so
Right, you were
so
able
it
to
rounded more accurately, right? Like people don't realize that.
No.
People take things for granted. They see it written on a piece of paper, and then
That's it.
that makes it truth.
So Rajman says, do not rely on these man down to the last second.
anyone who does halachic apps to put these disclaimers, people ignore them,
Don't read
but
anything.
people,
Or
developers.
you're saying it's more accurate. Like my Zmanim is more accurate.
But no one
Then
knows
the
that.
shul
The
moves later.
phone is a more accurate.
No, the phone
The phone
is
is the
more
most
accurate than
accurate.
MyZmanim, because
Right.
MyZmanim will give you the center of a zip code, that's like.
Okay, yeah, that's I meant to. Yeah, like
this mine could
shul-
change a whole minute across Brooklyn, let's say, right? And what does that mean for people there?
It means that that's why everyone grew up saying don't rely to the last minute, because you don't know which part of the zip code you're in. So,
I don't know.
that's why I tell
But yeah,
people,
first of all, you're doing much travel, you're doing 50, you already have an extra minute or two there, no? Most weeks for sure.
I don't know, Moshe's quoter is saying that the.
Oh, you have it hard coded at 50?
I did hard code.
By default,
saying
the
50
default is
minutes.
50?
The default is 50 because I grew up on the east side. I'm an MTJ guy. That was the default.
Oh,
I have people who change it to 72. It's not a problem. You have a menu. You pick a
But
city.
isn't 50 also just like you
Right, it changes.
Yeah, it goes.
Do you allow for
40 or
degrees?
50 or something.
There are degree-based calculations.
Oh, because I think I think the website they use 8.5 degrees by default.
I have it says 8.5, and I have
Oh.
a 50. And
That's
70.
I copied MyZmanim. Well, I mean
Or for your defaults.
their code is proprietary, but I copy their defaults because they're like the benchmark for web Zmanim.
How's MyZmanim make money?
Donations.
Donations? Is that what
Yeah,
it
oh,
is?
they have premium features,
Okay.
but they might have premium features, but they have donations, and they seem to get a lot of donations.
Everyone
every
uses
shul
them,
uses them.
every shul, every house.
So-
it's
That's
like prints them out.
I will make a dent in that. Mark my word. Turn off the camera, but.
I don't